We've been trying to figure out all day how to fit 5 numbers on this poster. I've been bringing it down nearly every week since the anti-gun violence bill failed here in the Senate due to a Republican filibuster, and this is the first week that this poster comes down to the floor of the House with 5 digits. 10,287 individuals, Americans, have been killed by guns since December 14th, the day of the Sandy Hook shooting. And Mr. President, what I've been endeavoring to do since the failure of that bill on the floor of the Senate, despite the fact that 80 to 90% of Americans supported the bill, is to bring to this floor the voices of victims, because the statistics are numbing at this point. 10,000 people in this country have died at the hands of gun violence since December 14th. And that apparently has not been enough to move this place or the House of Representatives to action. So my hope is that by coming down to this floor every week or so and starting to tell the real stories, the human stories about the individuals who have lost their lives and the absolutely catastrophic runoff of trauma that happens to a family in a neighborhood, in a community when you lose a loved one due to gun violence, that maybe that will move this place to do something. And so I actually just want to tell 3 stories this morning, because it now is kind of routine. You just sort of wonder, what day of the week is it going to be when you turn on CNN or look at your Twitter feed and you see active shooting in progress, school lockdown, people fleeing airports. Just kind of happens every week now. It's just become kind of a commonplace occurrence, almost raindrops in the background of news coverage on a daily basis. This week's shooting, next week's shooting. On October 21st, a 7th grader named Jose Reyes, student at Sparks Middle School, opened fire with a handgun that he just took from his parents. He killed a teacher, he killed himself, and he left 2 other students wounded at a middle school in Nevada. The teacher he killed was named Mike Lansbury, and boy, you don't get much more American than Mike Lansbury. He was an Alabama native. He graduated from high school in Reno, which is right next door to Sparks, in 1986, and he went and served in the Marine Corps. He joined the Air National Guard after he got out of the Marine Corps, and he rose to the rank of Master Sergeant, and he served as a cargo specialist in Kuwait and Afghanistan. He fought for this country. He put his life on the line to defend this nation, and as happens with thousands and thousands of veterans, when he came back, he decided to continue his public service, in this case, becoming an incredibly popular math teacher. His brother said of Mike, he's just the kind of person that if somebody needed help, he would be there. He loved teaching. He loved the kids. He loved coaching them. He was just a good all-around individual. But Mike is no longer, because he is now one of the over 10,000 Americans who have died at the hands of a gun, this time in a school shooting on October 21st. Gerardo Hernandez, according to his wife, was always excited to go to work. He was a joyful person who took pride in his duty for the American public. Gerardo was the TSA screener at Los Angeles Airport who was gunned down when Paul Ciancia, a troubled 23-year-old, walked into LAX with an assault weapon. And with a grievance and grudge against the government, opened fire, killing Gerardo Hernandez, age 39. He was the youngest in a family of 4 boys that had all emigrated from El Salvador. He was 15 years old when they made the decision to come to the United States to seek a better life, a safer life, a more stable life. And now the youngest of 4 boys is one of 10,287. And finally, Mr. President, the story of Maria Flores, who frankly didn't make headlines when she died over the summer along with her daughter Elizabeth Gomez. They died in Las Vegas when Manuel Mata, her boyfriend with a history of jealousy and domestic violence, shot and killed Maria, his girlfriend. He shot and killed her teenage daughter, and he wounded a 4-year-old before turning the gun on himself. Family members said that Mata had financial troubles, he drank often, he displayed jealousy, and he would constantly accuse his girlfriend of cheating. His girlfriend, Maria Flores, who died that day, they said, had threatened to move out of the residence a couple of weeks earlier, but she was convinced by Mata to stay. The daughter who was killed was scheduled to graduate 3 days after the murder took place. I tell these 3 stories for this reason. First, in the wake of the TSA shooting, a lot of people, a lot of folks from the gun lobby made the argument that the way to fix this problem was to just arm TSA agents. Just like people made the argument that the way to guarantee that another Sandy Hook happens is to just arm the teachers. Some people actually had the audacity to argue that actually an even better way is to just arm the students, too. And it speaks to this sort of new philosophy that has infested this place, Senate and the House, that I kind of describe as gun control Darwinism. The idea that if everybody has a gun, the good guys and the bad guys, that hopefully enough of the good guys will shoot the bad guys. You just throw a whole mess load of guns out there and let them figure it out, and in the end, we'll take care of the bad guys. We have some new data that tells us how backwards that philosophy is. Common sense tells you that's not a good idea, but the data now tells you that that's not a good idea. The American Journal of Public Health did the most comprehensive study ever done in this country, looking at rates of gun ownership and rates of homicide by gun death. They looked at decades of data across every state in the nation, and then they had the common sense to control for about every factor that you could think of: gender, race, poverty, income, education, alcohol use, crime rates. And what they found is pretty stunning and pretty straightforward. The American Journal of Public Health said that for every 1% increase in gun ownership in a particular state or locality or geographic region, there is a firearms homicide rate increase of 1%. A 1-to-1 ratio. Gun ownership goes up by 1%, increases in gun homicides go up by 1%. And police chiefs in city after city across the country will verify that. As they have taken guns off the street, as they have engaged in gun buyback programs, guess what? Miraculously, gun deaths decrease. Now, that's not to say that the only thing that matters here is the number of guns that are on the street. Clearly, this young man who walked into Sparks Middle School and the 23-year-old who walked into LAX had enormous issues that were going untreated. We're fooling ourselves if any of us are trying to perpetuate an argument that this is just about gun ownership. This is also about a very broken mental health system that we need to address. But a 1% increase in gun ownership leads to a 1% increase in gun violence. Less guns, guess what? Leads to less violence. And the reason that I tell Maria's story is because this is Domestic Violence Awareness Month, or maybe October was either completed it or in that month. And here's a stunning fact. In states that have comprehensive background checks, women are 38% less likely to die from domestic violence crimes. Women are 38% less likely to die from domestic violence crimes if they are lucky enough to live in a state that says before you buy a gun, you have to prove to us that you aren't a domestic abuser. Since 1998, 250,000 domestic abusers have been stopped from buying guns because of background checks laws. And that's just the domestic abusers who were dumb enough to show up at a gun store and try to buy a firearm. That doesn't count the, frankly, millions of domestic abusers who never walked into the store to buy the gun in the first place because they knew they were going to be denied. Women in the United States are 11 times more likely to be murdered by a gun than women in any other high-income nation. And we have a solution. Background checks. 40% less likely to die from domestic violence if you live in a state with a background check. And so, Mr. President, I bring just 3 stories to the floor today in my effort to bring voices to the victims. Those of Mike, a teacher in Nevada, Gerardo, an immigrant to this country who loved doing his public service as a TSA screener, and Maria Flores, one of thousands of women across this country being killed by their spouses or partners because, in part, of the ease of access to a gun in this country. 10,287 people. Tough to fit on one sheet. That's just in 11 months. It frankly won't take that long, just a handful of years from now, before there is absolutely no way to fit this number on this board, unless the United States Senate and the House of Representatives decides that 90% of Americans are right, and we should make sure that criminals can't access guns. We should ban illegal gun trafficking. We should expand the reach of our mental health system so that we can finally say that Congress, the Senate, and the House is going to do something to give voice to these victims. Mr. President, I yield the floor and note the absence of a quorum.